Welcome to the Wander Mode podcast, where we celebrate the fearless spirit of women embracing life's wanderings. Where every story is a spark of inspiration and reminds us that sometimes the most beautiful moments happen when we simply embrace wherever the journey may lead. Today's episode is episode 50 of the Live Life in Wander Mode podcast, and I can hardly even believe that I have recorded 50 episodes, half of which are incredible interviews with women who are just wandering through life, embracing all of the things that are coming their way. And I think it's awesome that with today being episode 50, I am reflecting on my interview with Lucie, the egg farmer out of Wrenshall, Minnesota. The timing is really interesting of this because although I actually recorded my interview with Lucie several months ago, last week I had the opportunity to go to Lucie's farm. And I went up there with my daughter and my mom. And if you recall from the end of that episode, I was sharing with Lucie my funny story / nickname that my mom and I share with Big Chicken, Little Chicken, when we're trying to see if the other person would be available for a FaceTime or a phone call. We'll often message Cluck Cluck. And like I said, I don't even recall where that came from, but it's been our thing for a long time. And so I knew my mom was coming into town last weekend, and I decided, all right, we're doing it. We're going to go up to Lucie's farm in Wrenshall. It was a 2.5-hour drive, so no biggie, right? And we're going to experience Lucie's amazing chickens, amazing eggs, the berry farm, all the things. So if you know me at all, you know that I am terrible with surprises. I can keep secrets when people tell me information that needs to be kept in confidence. I 100% can do that. But when it comes to something that I'm giving to somebody or I'm going to go do with somebody and it's meant to be a surprise, I'm really, really bad at keeping it because I just get way too excited. So I popped on to Lucie's website, locallylaid.com, and I clicked on her Airbnb box, and I was just looking for one of them that would have availability. And sure enough, the nest popped up with availability, and I'm like, done. We're doing it. We're doing it one night. It's going to be totally amazing. I booked it. I was so excited. And I hardly could contain that excitement until the next day when I chatted with my mom on the phone. And I said, Mom, you need to get onto your computer and I'm going to tell you to go to a website. She says, okay. So she hops onto the computer and I tell her, type in locallylaid.com, and she's kind of talking on the side and she's like, oh yeah, that's right. You interviewed her, and has that episode launched yet and whatnot. My mom's not usually caught up with my podcast episodes. So I said, oh yeah, that one came out this Wednesday. And she's like, okay, well now what? I'm on the website. So I said, okay, click on Airbnb. And I said, open up the nest. She clicks on it and she's scrolling through the pictures, scrolling through the information. She said, well, wow, this is kind of a very different idea. And my mom also owns an Airbnb out in Idaho. And so she was fascinated by the idea that you could have an Airbnb that's attached to a chicken coop and that people are actually willing to pay money to go do that. And so she's scrolling through the pictures and looking at the listing. And I said, guess where we're staying on Friday night? And she just starts laughing. And I said, yep, we're totally doing this. So she flies out Thursday night. We get our stuff packed up because with the Airbnb box, you have to bring your own bedding. We grabbed some sheets, we grabbed some blankets. I packed my kiddo, and we're heading up to Wrenshall. And the drive up there was easy peasy. We got a little lost when we got into Wrenshall. It's not a super big town in my mind. It was, we'll get there and then we'll just punch in the actual address. and we didn't have any service. So we had to call Jason, Lucie's husband, to get the specific address to get us to Locally Laid Egg Farm. As you approach it, it has just this big, massive metal chicken, and we were just so excited. And you turn onto the drive, and you slowly make your way toward the back of the property, and then you see all the chickens in their little fenced pasture area, and it's attached to these tiny little buildings, sheds, if you will. We pull up to ours, and my daughter just couldn't even contain herself. She was so excited. I need to see the chickens. I need to see the chickens. And I get her out of her car seat, get her on the ground. She's like running up to the fence right away. And she knew we had brought food for the chickens because Jason had indicated in his check-in information that they like carbs, that they'll eat salad, but their favorite thing is carbs. And I mean, really, can you blame them? No. We all love carbs. We have brought like a loaf of bread and some cookie to feed the chickens. And so, of course, she blows through the loaf of bread in a hot second, feeding all the chickens. But the chickens loved her right out of the gate. And this little shed is just so adorable because you open the door and honestly, the bunk bed takes up 3/4 of the space. But we got ourselves nice and cozy in there. We got the bedding set up on the bottom. I put my daughter's blow-up Hiccapop mattress on the top bunk so that she wouldn't roll out because it has bumpers. She slept up there. And the cool part is on one end of this shed, there's just this big glass wall. And on the other side, the chickens are roosting. And is the word roosting? Whatever. Anyways, they have their nesting boxes in there, and they were sitting in the nesting boxes, or they were sitting on the perch and looking into the little shed. Then we greeted the chickens, and Jason came around eventually and asked if we wanted to do chicken chores. And your biggest chicken chore when you arrive at night is to put the chickens to bed. So he explained that around 9:30, 9:45-ish p.m., that the chickens would just slowly start to section themselves off into these different coops, and that your biggest responsibility was to lock the doors because that's what keeps out the coyotes. He showed us how to do that, and he just said, otherwise, just enjoy the chickens, and if any of them get loose or outside of the fence, just pick them up and put them back in. So that's what we did. We were watching the chickens through our little shed. We ran around outside for a while. We took a walk through the orchard, and we collected the chickens that jumped the fence and put them back into their little fenced pasture area. And it was hilarious because the chickens would be running all over and you're trying to catch them. And some of them were real fast, but for the most part, we were able to navigate it. At one point, I ran to the local bar, which was seriously the only bar that I at least saw in Wrenshall. I think there was, a post office, a school, a bar, a little tiny market, and that was about it. And then locally laid eggs. I picked up some pizza for dinner, and we enjoyed dinner at the picnic table outside of the shed and watched the chickens. And just like Jason said, it was almost like clockwork. At around 9:30, you slowly started to see more and more chickens make their way into the coops. At around 9:45, there were a few stragglers. I would say maybe like 10. And we went around, picked them up, got them inside the coops, and then we locked the doors. And then my mom and I did quote unquote perimeter checks, right? Like making sure there weren't any feisty nachos roaming the perimeter that we somehow didn't see. And then we were leaving them to their inevitable demise, but we didn't have any stragglers. Then we were able to get all tucked in and go to bed. My daughter was so excited to be there that it took her a long time to settle and actually fall asleep. But somewhere around 10:30, the chickens were sleeping. They were honestly silent. You wouldn't have even known that they were there. And then we were out as well. I slept great in that shed. I don't know if it was just the fresh air coming through the windows or being next to nature or the mattress or what, but I slept so well, way better than I usually do. And then around I don't know, 5 a.m. or so, you could start to hear the little noises coming from the chickens, the little purrs, if you will, and the little tiny clucks. There were no roosters, so you didn't have the jarring wake up, but I definitely started hearing the sounds. And when I took my eye mask off and took out my earplugs, I looked over at the wall with the glass, and they were all just staring back at me like, hello, it's time to let us out. So I think it was like 5:15 or something, and I decided to head out there. And Jason said, you have to get a super cool video of them by turning your phone upside down and then holding it near the doorway as the chickens flood out of the coops, because they're all excited to see the rest of their friends, and they're excited to have the fresh air and the space and all the things. That's what I did. My mom was still sleeping. My kiddo was still sleeping. So I just went around on my own and opened the doors, got these really funny videos of the chickens flooding out of these spaces into the general space and, chattering it up with their friends. And then there was even like a really big pocket that came over to the other coops that I was opening. And it was almost as if they were just waiting for their friends to come out, because they're sitting there staring at the doors. And so I opened them up, and they just were all, just running everywhere, and it was chaos, but they were very, very happy. Then around 8:30, Jason came around and we did the second part of the chicken chores, which is to do the egg collection. Now, I was really hoping that my little one was going to want to do the egg collection. But honestly, I think being at her height and then just being surrounded by all of those chickens just was a little overwhelming for her. So when they were easier eggs to collect in the basket, I held her as I was collecting the eggs, but there were several situations where within the nesting boxes, you had to reach under a chicken to collect the eggs, and that's just harder to do and hold the basket and hold a 3.5-year-old. So I would put her outside of the fence, and then I would hold the basket, collect the eggs. And actually, the egg collection part was my favorite. I really, really enjoyed going around and looking for those eggs. I mean, it was seriously like an Easter egg hunt or something. It felt very rewarding to find these brown eggs, and some of them were still warm from having just been laid. So if you had to collect from underneath a hen, you had to just put your hand under there and then feel around and grab the eggs and then put them in the basket. And really, none of the chickens seemed to mind. They continued to just sit there and wait to lay another one. I don't know. So we did the egg collecting. My mom went with Jason to get the feed or the grain for the chickens and then fill the feeders. They replaced the water and didn't move any fences or anything, but Jason and Lucie move the fences every few days so that the chickens continually have fresh pasture and movement and things like that. We didn't get to partake in that part, and it was a little early for the orchard to do any collecting. But after we did all the egg collecting and the grain and the water, then we were able to take the baskets to the cooler, and we decided to buy some eggs from them. We buy locally laid eggs at our grocery store already, but the experience of collecting them and then taking them right off the farm was too cool to pass up. So we bought 2 dozen, and my daughter was able to grab eggs right out of the basket and then put them into cartons and bring them home. We decided to buy a locally laid hat, which is adorable. My daughter wore it around for the rest of the day. And then we bought some local maple syrup that had been crafted by one of their neighbors. And from there, we went to a quilt show up in Duluth, Minnesota. And we went to a drive-in on the way home, and it just was such an amazing weekend. And what was so cool about it was not just the fact that you were surrounded by chickens, but just really Lucie and Jason's hospitality and the care that they put into that farm it's palpable. You can feel it. You can feel it being around the chickens. You can feel it with Jason coming and wanting to share his knowledge with you. All the little tiny instructions that were hanging on the wall and the binder with the suggested places to go for restaurants or a coffee shop that was 10 to 15 minutes away or other activities that you could go do. It just really created this awesome vibe there that was very addicting. And it makes me want to go back every year because it was such a fun and unique experience. And I don't talk about our Airbnb business a ton on this podcast, but when you're an Airbnb owner, similar to if you are a hotel owner, or maybe you're a chef where you have competitors or you have other people that you interact with that do the same, it's a little bit of a hazard of the job to go stay at other places when you are also an owner, because you can't help but be like, oh, wow, like I totally loved this part, or, oh, I would have done this part differently, or whatever. It's just a natural part of being in this business. But I really do have to say, Lucie asked for some feedback after we had stayed there. And the only feedback I could really give her to change would be to put a sticker on the inside of the egg carton to give us instructions on how to take care of the eggs once we got home. We don't ever have the experience of eating or consuming farm fresh eggs, seriously, straight out from underneath the chicken. So when we got them home, it was sort of like, well, now what? Now what am I supposed to do with this egg? Do I put it in the refrigerator? How do you clean it? Like, is there a way to clean it? Is there a solution that we need to clean it with, etc.? And that was really the only feedback that I could give her, because although I would say that the accommodations were rustic, you went to the bathroom in an outhouse, you were, for all intents and purposes, sleeping in a shed with chickens. It was so unique, and they had all these thoughtful little touches, like a container where you could take home half a dozen free eggs for yourself. They had a locally laid sticker. They were there. They were accessible. But really, truly, I don't know how you would walk away from this experience being anything other than absolutely thrilled and feel like you just experienced something very unique. And it was so cool. And if you ever end up in Minnesota, I would highly recommend driving the 2 hours north, 2.5 hours north to Wrenshall, Minnesota, and staying at the locally laid Airbnb box, because it is an experience that you will never forget, and it brings you closer to having a connection with where your food comes from, that at the end of the day, if anything, you're going to greatly appreciate the work and the care that goes into those chickens and egg processing and getting those things on your grocery store shelves. It was so cool. I loved experiencing it with my mom and my kiddo. And I really love that for episode 50, I was able to share my reflection about Lucie's lovely farm. Thanks for wandering with me today. If you were inspired by this episode and think it would ignite a spark in a friend, don't hesitate to share. And if you're craving more from the Wander Mode community, hop on over to Instagram at WanderModeCo. Meet you in the next episode, and until then, wander on.